Jonathan Luna's workday started out the same as any other day would have. He left his Elk Ridge townhome that he shared with his wife, who was a doctor, and their 2 sons. He drove 14 miles to the federal office in Baltimore, Maryland, where he worked as an assistant U.S. attorney. And it was a busy day for 38-year-old Jonathan. He was right in the middle of a trial that involved 2 men that were charged with running a drug ring out of a music studio. And he spent the morning in court and the evening kind of hammering out a plea deal with the defense attorneys. This plea deal was going to be presented to the judge the next morning, and Jonathan wanted to make sure that there were no mistakes. The judge, William D. Quarles Jr., had actually fined Jonathan $25 a few days earlier for showing up late to court. Quarles was a stickler, so there was no room for error. Shortly after 9 p.m. that night, Jonathan left a voicemail for one of the defense lawyers. He said that he had worked on the plea in his office, but he had to go home. This defense lawyer's name is Arcangelo M. Duminelli. And Duminelli recalled, Jonathan said once he got home, he would work on the agreement so that it was ready for the morning. I think he said he would return it to the office. But that was the last time that defense attorney Duminelli would hear from Jonathan Luna. The following day, December 4th, 2003, I was adding 20 years to that, 2003, at 5 a.m., Daniel Geeman arrived at his job. He was a driller at the Sensig and Weaver well drilling in Lancaster County, PA. I was typing these notes really fast. This is in the heart of Amish country. Now, when Daniel parked his truck on the side of the building near the woods off Dry Tavern Road, he clocked in, he made himself a coffee, and he headed outside to fill the company's 6 trucks with gas for the day. A tiny red light near the woods caught his eye. At this time, a coworker had shown up, so the pair of them decided to investigate. Daniel had assumed that a drunk driver had run off the 2-lane road in the dark. Apparently, that stretch of asphalt, dotted with farms, brick ramblers, and open fields, really doesn't see much traffic. It's so remote that even the locals don't travel it very much. But a closer look by the 2 men his family's first-floor apartment and read one of the many books in his mother's linen closet. Jonathan's best friend, Daniel Rivera, said, "We just thought he was a bit of an oddball. At school, he often showed up for class wearing suits and ties. He had curly hair and a runner's physique. He was 6 foot tall and described as handsome. Very handsome. He loved clothes, and his friends called him a fashionista. Raised by a Filipino father who waited tables at neighborhood restaurants and an African-American mother who had grown up in the deep South, Jonathan eventually set his sights on law school. After graduating with a history degree from Fordham University in New York in 1987, Jonathan visited Germany. He enjoyed new places and thought that a trip before entering law school would tide him over until he could afford more. Toward the end of his first year at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, he found out his father had been diagnosed with cancer. Without hesitation, he returned home to take care of him. His friend Reggie said that taking that year off was one of the easiest decisions that Jonathan had ever made. Jonathan and Reggie were 2 of a handful of African-American law students in a class of about 200. The pair of them bonded instantly. They roomed together when Jonathan came back from his gap year. Reggie likened their relationship to that of Felix and Oscar from The Odd Couple. And if you've never seen that, you definitely should. Jonathan was messy, and Reggie was compulsively neat. Jonathan was athletic and ran marathons. Reggie only exercised when he had to. Their 2-bedroom apartment cost $345 a month and was sparsely furnished with hand-me-downs. Jonathan did most of the cooking. His favorite was spaghetti and meatballs, a dish that he had learned to cook over his mother's shoulder. He treasured his Luther Vandross boxed set CDs, only allowing his closest friends to borrow them. He was proud of the diversity of his friends at law school. There was Jonathan Brown, a North Carolinian whose father was the dean of UNC's law school, and whose mother ran a Jewish social agency in Raleigh. Jonathan and Jonathan met in a criminal law class after Jonathan had spotted him wearing a Michael Dukakis for president. I might have said that last name wrong, just like everything else in this video. Both of them were Democrats and politically active. Before long, Jonathan Brown considered Jonathan Luna to be his best friend. There was a man named Michael Bayer who liked to mountain climb and attended Phillips Academy Andover, the boarding school in Massachusetts. Michael once videotaped a law school skit involving a shirtless Jonathan Luna in a tie, a suit coat, and slacks, sipping a can of Pepsi and dancing like MC Hammer. He was MC Lawyer. The next year, Jonathan was elected president of his law school class. And there was Shuford, who climbed out of the projects of Wilmington, North Carolina, to go on to serve as director of the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Reggie said that Jonathan was not limited in terms of race. He liked people for who they were. And frankly, that was a bit unique for North Carolina in the late 1980s. He described Jonathan Luna as one of the best souls he'd ever met. Now, during Jonathan year at Arnold and Porter in Washington, but he decided that the public sector was a better fit, and he snagged a job at the Federal Trade Commission, and then signed on 3 years later as a prosecutor with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. When an opportunity arose in 1999 to work for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore, Jonathan Luna jumped at the chance. Former U.S. Attorney Lynne said that he was bright, engaging, and enthusiastic. I just thought that he would be a really good prosecutor. Jonathan worked hard. He stayed late. He came in early, and Battaglia was pleased with her choice. Jonathan earned the respect of his seasoned colleagues. He was smart, funny, and loyal. During his 4 years with the office, he prosecuted about 80 criminal cases and 6 civil cases, many involving drugs, but there were others. The Baltimore man that he helped put away for 15 years for essaying his 7-year-old daughter, and the man sentenced to 120 months for exploitation of a minor. So it appeared that everything was going really great until the arrival of a new boss 2 years later. Thomas DiBaggio, who replaced Battaglia in 2001 when Governor Paris Glending appointed her to the Court of Appeals. Thomas did not care much for Jonathan Luna. The young prosecutor had cut deals in a case or two over DiBaggio's objections. He and Jonathan did not see eye to eye, recalls Andrew White, a former prosecutor in that office, who is now in private practice. If you got on the wrong foot with Thomas DiBaggio, it was difficult to get back in his good standings. And then came the case that may have cost Jonathan Luna his life. The trial was supposed to be short and simple. A Baltimore man, Naco Brown, was being tried for a string of bank robberies, and Jonathan and his co-prosecutor had key evidence and the testimony of a witness that would eventually put Brown away for 25 years. The evidence was tens of thousands of dollars seized from a safe in the apartment of Brown's accomplice. It had been packaged in 3 heat-sealed, see-through plastic containers. Dollar bills in one stack, stacks of 5 in another, and the third container had 10s and 20s. One day during the trial, FBI Special Agent Tony Campano wheeled the unmarked cash into the courtroom on a cart. When I saw the FBI agent with a cart of money rolling down the hall in a federal courthouse, I was stunned, said Kenneth Ravenel, Brown's attorney. It was said Joseph Evans, Jonathan's supervisor at the time. Personally, though, I have a hard time thinking he stole the money. Evans is now an assistant federal public defender in Baltimore, said the money was left unattended at times, leaving so many opportunities for people to snag it. Campano, now in the FBI's Boston field office, said in a brief phone conversation that it was the responsibility of the U.S. Attorney's Office to make sure that the money was stored safely. The development did not help Jonathan's troubled relationship with U.S. Attorney DiBaggio. By now, it was no secret that DiBaggio did not like him. He had given Jonathan a less than favorable performance review and even put him on notice. One day, DiBaggio stormed into Luna's office with an edict to pack his bags. Evans suggested Luna get a lawyer. He hired White, his former colleague in the office. DiBaggio said, "Don't come into work the next day," and "You can't do that," White said. "I spoke with them, and they changed course. Jonathan did not deserve to be removed." Luna was quite disturbed by DiBaggio's dislike, Colleen said. He became less attentive to his work, less focused, and a week before his death, he confided into Minnelli that he was considering leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office and going out on his own. Jonathan was human and certainly felt the effects of his own office's scrutiny, and he was struggling with that, White said. Many of his colleagues worried about him, the admonishment from the judge and the fine for being late, the investigation into whether he played a role into that missing money, DiBaggio's disdain for him, and on top of that, Jonathan's drug trafficking case was falling apart because he neglected to provide defense attorneys with critical mitigating information. He worried that one more misstep would cost him his job. He was juggling his home life, helping his wife, a busy OBGYN, raise their 2 young children, taking care of his elderly parents, whom he had moved to a small apartment in Columbia. And some believe that the pressure was just too much. The Lancaster County Coroner's Office ruled Jonathan Luna's death a homicide based on one thing: the physical evidence. There was a fingernail wound that appeared to be defensive. I think I meant to say defensive. There were bruises on his testicles, says an official familiar with the investigation. You could argue that the wounds are in places that are self-inflicted, technically, the official said, but they could have been inflicted by someone who wanted to make him suffer. It looks like a homicide. However, federal investigators weren't buying it. They said they investigated the bruising allegation but found nothing. They believe that Jonathan stabbed himself 36 times to gain sympathy from coworkers, possibly DiBaggio. The fatal wound, the puncturing of the carotid artery, may have been an accident. He didn't mean to actually unalive himself. Now, Jonathan Luna's wife has not talked publicly about his case. But why would Jonathan Luna, a hard-working prosecutor with a successful wife and 2 adorable boys, unalive himself? Were there workplace issues enough for him to drive through 3 states just to do this? Did he know someone in Lancaster County? How did he happen onto that remote road into the dark? Would he have stabbed himself 36 times? And if he was killed, who did it? Why? Was someone waiting in the backseat when he drove out of the Baltimore parking garage that night? Did he meet someone along the way? These are the questions I want to debate with you guys. Mark Safarink, a retired FBI criminal profiler who investigated the killing of a Swiss Army knife is not the type of weapon you'd use in a homicide. An FBI news release issued 3 months after Jonathan's death offered a timeline for his whereabouts on December 3rd and 4th, adding that investigators had obtained evidence which indicated that Jonathan may have had contact with somebody between the time that he departed the U.S. State's Attorney's Office and the time that his body was located. In an interview, Brooks, the Baltimore FBI official who oversaw this investigation, disputed that. He said, "We are certain that there's no evidence to show that he was with anyone after he left the courthouse." Jonathan left his office at 11:38 p.m. He headed north on Interstate 95, away from his house. His car passed through several toll booths in Maryland and Delaware before stopping at an ATM in Newark. He stopped at 3:20 a.m. to get gas, or at least somebody did. His debit card was used. Brooks said the FBI in Baltimore closed the case administratively, meaning that no one was charged. It could be reopened if new information surfaces. They have received more than 5,000 tips and interviewed several hundred people. The Pennsylvania State Police, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, FBI's Baltimore office, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland were all involved in the investigation of this case. The case remains open in Pennsylvania. "It's a heck of a long way to go to take your life," said Ravenel, the Baltimore criminal defense lawyer who represented one of the 2 defendants in the case that Jonathan was prosecuting. Wayne Ross, the forensic pathologist for Lancaster County's coroner office who performed Jonathan's autopsy, said, "I can't talk about it because it's a homicide in my perspective. In my mind, this case will one day be prosecuted." White, Luna's former colleague, is dubious. "At the end of the day, it's going to remain one of those cases that will never be solved. And it is very sad." Okay, so let's talk about this. Why would you drive through 3 states, 95 something miles, to end up driving basically into a creek bed, then getting out of the car after you've potentially stabbed yourself, to fall face down and drown in a creek bed? I don't know, something about that just doesn't seem right to me. I feel as though if he were going to unalive himself, he wouldn't have gone to all that trouble. It just seems crazy to me that he would have gone to those extremes. I also can't see someone potentially stabbing themselves 36 times to gain like a sympathy vote. I mean, even if you said you were mugged or something, 36 times is a bit excessive to do that to yourself. And I mean, okay, I have trouble giving myself a shot, like 1 shot. So, I mean, I think it would take some serious, like, cojones is the only word I can think of, to do that to yourself 36 times. I also couldn't find any information on whether or not he was left or right-handed. Now, I researched this sort of quickly, so I did not do a deep dive, and if anyone finds out, let me know. But I think it would be really hard to get your carotid artery either way, you know? I don't know. I don't think that he did this to himself. However, I don't have any suggestions on who may have done it. I can only imagine let me know